Welcome to the final presentation in our Catholic Speakers Online series for 2010. We're delighted to have Father Tom Ryan speaking on Wellsprings of Healing, Healing Ourselves and Healing Our World. Father Tom Ryan is involved very deeply in ecumenical and interreligious affairs as director of the Paulist North American Office for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations in Washington, D.C. He was also the director of the Canadian Center for Ecumenism between 81 and 95. He has a number of publications, and I'll be mentioning one of them at the end. If you wish to get in touch with Father Tom anytime, you may also use the email address that you see here. It's also on the handouts, which I hope that you have been able to download. So now I give you Father Tom Ryan.
Hello everyone, welcome to our little theater in cyberspace where we will be traveling across the miles at the speed of light in communication with one another. This presentation is the fruit of a reconciliation and unity study pilgrimage that took place over 2 weeks' time in June of 2010, just this past summer, and involved about 15 participants. It was co-sponsored by the Paulist National Office for Reconciliation, whose work is directed by Father Tom Kane, and the National Office for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations, in which I work. We have inspiring examples of people at work in 3 countries. Father Kane and I thought that meeting people who are working for unity and reconciliation, hearing their stories, seeing the effects of their efforts, that all this could inspire renewed efforts on our part in our home context.
As Father Tom begins his presentation with Northern Ireland, we thought we would find out something about our attendees. And I'd like to ask you in this poll, how involved are you in efforts aimed at healing and unity among diverse believers? Please choose one of these so we can know something about our participants. It's looking like it's pretty evenly divided up here between people who are involved somewhat frequently and for those who it's the first time. 20%, 25%. It's only one person who's listed this as their first priority, but perhaps as a result of this talk, people will be inspired to move up in their level of involvement. Do you have any comments, Tom, about what you see?
I think it looks pretty much like the situations we know in our church congregations, as well as amongst our friends and families. There's spectrum across the board. So hopefully what we're doing here today will provide some inspiration and motivation, open our eyes to where we might be able to bring the healing balm in relationships and truly serve the cause of reconciliation and unity in the little space in which we live, in the ground under our feet, and the space within our reach.
Thank you, Tom. We'll move on to your presentation.
We begin with what is known as the Troubles in Northern Ireland. The Troubles started in the late 1960s and consisted of about 30 years of recurring acts of intense violence between elements of Northern Ireland's nationalist community, which is principally Roman Catholic, and Unionist community, which is principally Protestant, during which 3,254 people were killed. The conflict was caused by the disputed status of Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom and the discrimination against the nationalist minority by the dominant Unionist majority. The violence was characterized by the armed campaigns of paramilitary groups, including the Provisional Irish Republican Army, or IRA, and their campaign from 1969 to 1997. That was aimed at the end of British rule in Northern Ireland and the creation of a new All-Ireland 32-county Irish Republic, and the Ulster Volunteer Force, which was formed in 1966 in response to the perceived erosion of both the British character and Unionist domination of Northern Ireland. The state security forces were the British Army and the police, known as the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and they were also involved in the violence. This mural, Bloody Sunday, depicts the events of 30 January 1972 when the British Army opened fire on a civil rights demonstration in Derry, killing 14 people. A local priest waves a blood-stained handkerchief at the soldiers as he leads a group of men carrying the body of the youngest victim away from the scene of the shooting. The soldier stands in a civil rights banner, evoking the price the people pay for democratic freedom. The incident occurred during a civil rights protest march against the government's policy of internment without trial. The Provisional Irish Republican Army's IRA campaign against the partition of Ireland had begun in the 2 years prior to Bloody Sunday, but public perceptions of the day boosted the status of and recruitment into the organization enormously. Bloody Sunday remains among the most significant events in the troubles of Northern Ireland. The Widgery Report. Within 11 weeks after Bloody Sunday, a report was issued by a British government commission under the direction of Lord Widgery. The Widgery Report was salt in the wound for Irish Republicans because it cleared the British Army of culpability and cast serious doubt over the innocence of the victim. It was perceived as a whitewash. Pictured here is a priest who has been very involved with the work for peace in Northern Ireland, Father Crilly, pastor of the parish of St. Eugene in Port Glenone. He related to us how the events of Bloody Sunday in 1972 blew trust out of the water and animosities reached new heights. Both Irish Republican Army members and British Loyalist activists were arrested and treated as common criminals. The final escalation was a hunger strike. You see here a picture of Tommy Sands, a prisoner who died of a hunger strike. The prisoners didn't want to die, but they had convictions and were prepared to stick it out. The things that were granted in the end, Father Crilly said, could have been granted at the outset and the deaths avoided. But there was no trust. He related how when a Catholic group went to visit the prisoners, the very fact that they were all Catholics evoked provocative behavior from guards and prisoners alike, including the Irish Republican prisoners, who knew the Catholic Church was against the IRA's violent methods. But when representatives from the Irish Council of Churches and the Catholic Church went into the prisons together, it was a totally different experience. When we went in as an inter-church group, Father Crilly said, people didn't see me as representing the power bloc of the Roman Catholic Church. Those inside the prison were able to hear better what we were saying. The medium was the message. In the very composition of our group, we represented the kind of reconciliation we wanted to promote among the prisoners. We modeled the respect for each other we wanted them to demonstrate toward one another. All the structures can be in place, he reflected, but if there's no trust, nothing will happen. The visuals all about the city make it easy to understand why the animosity stays fresh, close to the memory and near the surface in the minds of people. On June 15th, 2010, while we were in Northern Ireland, an important event took place. In a speech to the British House of Commons and televised on a huge screen in a public square in Londonderry, British Prime Minister David Cameron condemned the killing by British soldiers of innocent Irish civilians engaged in a protest march against internment without trial on the streets of Derry in 1972 in the event known as Bloody Sunday. In his speech, the Prime Minister formally apologized for the unjustified and the unjustifiable killing of 14 civilians, saying, "What happened should never, ever have happened. The government is ultimately responsible for the conduct of the armed forces, and for that, on behalf of the government, indeed on behalf of our country, I am deeply sorry." There was celebration in the streets. Our group was in Northern Ireland that day and in Derry the next, where events gave us a clear lesson on what may seem like a fairly basic truth in human relationships: the importance of saying sorry. The British Prime Minister's apology provided the people of Northern Ireland with absolute clarity concerning a divisive and traumatic event, along with an opportunity for reconciliation. Cameron's words were perceived as generous and unambiguous, and left a big impression on the families of the victims. For 38 years, the innocence of the dead and injured on Bloody Sunday was officially known to the world. Prime Minister Cameron's apology was based on a new monumental report of 5,000 pages compiled over the past 12 years by Lord Saville at the cost of $281 million. That report accused the British soldiers of ill discipline, of lying, of contravening the rules for using weapons, of killing when they were under no threat, and of not issuing any warnings before firing. The Widgery Tribunal findings have been laid aside, Cameron said. Not many states in the world would do that, and we should see it as a sign of strength that we have done it. As one Derry citizen said, "Today is a day when truth has won out." Church leaders were quick to seize upon this healing moment. Local Church of Ireland Anglican Bishop of Derry, Dr. Ken Good, said that this was a time to show that we have the desire and the will to deal courageously and humbly with issues that have long been painful and contentious. Good advice, not only for events of national import such as this, but for long-held personal grievances as well. An unprecedented meeting between leaders of the three main Protestant churches in Ireland, Presbyterian, Methodist, and Church of Ireland, and the families of those who died in Bloody Sunday, took place in Derry while we were there. They recognized that the ways in which people on different sides of the community have viewed the events of Bloody Sunday and have interpreted their significance has been a source of pain and tension over the past 3 decades, but that this report now presents us with the possibility of some healing of those differences. Three church leaders made a presentation to the families of a replica of Hands Across the Divide, a sculpture which stands near a bridge at the west end of the city, depicting 2 men reaching out their hand to one another. "We can do more together than we can apart," said retired Catholic Bishop of Derry, Edward Daly. "We all have love for this city, whatever we call it, Londonderry or Derry, and we don't want there to be a divide." Facing the truth and offering sincere apology are important steps on the road to reconciliation. Do these realities find expression in our own lives and relationships? The Peace and Reconciliation Group in Derry or Londonderry is worthy of note. We also met with that group, a community relations organization that was set up in 1976 to address practical ways to work toward understanding and reconciliation in the context of the conflict in Northern Ireland. Throughout its history, the Peace and Reconciliation Group has used a variety of diverse programs to create opportunities for people to meet and talk about dealing with the past and shaping the future. They offer courses which offer alternative ways of dealing with conflict. They build cross-border relationships and confidence between individuals and enable people to build bridges between communities that have been polarized by historical and political events. One of these programs is called Family Respite Holidays. It provides families from throughout the Londonderry area with an opportunity to relax and spend time together away from the daily stresses and pressures. A team of trained staff and volunteers are on site at all times. Through their indoor and outdoor activities in beautiful surroundings, the adults and children are able to get to know one another and come to a better understanding of their diverse cultures. The place that hosts the families for these respite holidays is Corrymeela, a community founded in 1965 to promote reconciliation and peace building through the healing of social, religious, and political divisions. Corrymeela's vision of Christian community and reconciliation is expressed through a commitment to promoting interaction between and building positive relationships among all kinds of people. The community currently has 150 members and over 5,000 friends and supporters throughout the world. You can find them on their website. The Family Respite Holidays approach reminds me of some valuable advice given to me by a veteran ecumenist when I was still a student in theology. Before you try to talk theology or politics, he said, just spend some time creating a relationship. He knew the importance of trust. We go now to Coventry, England. Most of the ruined churches of England are the outcome of the violence of an earlier age, the dissolution of the monasteries during the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. But the ruins of St. Michael's Church in Coventry are the consequence of the violence of modern times. On the night of 14 November 1940, the German Luftwaffe devastated the city of Coventry, and as it burned, the cathedral burned with it. A total of 568 people lost their lives. Coventry, the only English city to lose its cathedral as a result of aerial bombardment, was one of the places we visited. It would not have been surprising if, following the raid, another kind of flame were to have been fanned into being, the flame of bitterness and hatred. It was largely due to the inspired prophetic leadership of the cathedral provost at the time, Dick Howard, that a different spirit prevailed. On the morning after its destruction, the resolve to rebuild the cathedral was born, not as an act of defiance, but rather as a sign of faith, trust, and hope for the future of the world. Shortly afterward, the cathedral stonemason, Jack Forbes, observing that two of the charred medieval roof timbers had fallen across each other amid the rubble, tied them together and set them up in the ruined sanctuary. Again, it was the imagination of Provost Howard that led to the words, "Father, forgive," being inscribed behind the charred cross. Father, forgive. Not forgive them, which would create in us and them polarity, but simply forgive, because we too have committed acts of destruction and violence. At the same time, a local priest, the Reverend Arthur Wales, created another cross by binding together three of the huge medieval nails that littered the debris. The cross of nails became the symbol of Coventry's international ministry of reconciliation and was also placed in the ruined sanctuary on a simple stone altar, built there as an altar of reconciliation. The Coventry Litany of Reconciliation is a prayer based on the 7 deadly sins. Pray it along with me. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. The hatred which divides nation from nation, race from race, class from class.
Father, forgive.
The covetous desires of people and nations to possess what is not their own.
Father, forgive.
The greed which exploits the work of human hands and lays waste the earth.
Father, forgive.
Our envy of the welfare and happiness of others.
Father, forgive.
our indifference to the plight of the imprisoned,
Father, forgive.
the lust which dishonors the bodies of men, women, and children,
Father, forgive.
the pride which leads us to trust in ourselves and not in God.
Father, forgive.
Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Today, a new cathedral stands at a right angle to the ruins of the old one, connected to it by a glass wall, enabling you while standing in one to see into the other, symbolizing architecturally the movement from death to resurrection. In the old cathedral's ruins, beneath the sculpture of a man and woman kneeling with their arms around each other, reads the inscription, "In the face of destructive forces, human dignity and love will triumph over disaster and bring nations together in respect and peace." An international center for leadership in ruins was opened in 1960 by the Bishop of Berlin, Otto de Belliers, and the money for it was furnished by a Berlin donor who had himself lost his entire family in an Allied air raid. The center was subsequently extended by young volunteer Christians from Germany, the name of whose organization, Action Reconciliation, sums up so much of what the early days of the cathedral's life stood for then and continues to represent today. A Center for Leadership Training in Reconciliation, whose educational department hosts about 15,000 students annually. The community of the Cross of Nails was founded as a practical expression of the work of reconciliation, supporting the rebuilding of a hospital wing in Dresden, Germany, which the English Air Force had bombed. It also contributed to the building of the House of Reconciliation in Corrymeela in Northern Ireland, and a house for friendship and dialogue between Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people in the Galilee. The cathedral continues to be actively involved in areas of conflict such as Northern Ireland and Central America, while groups inspired by the symbol of the Cross of Nails have sprung up in many parts of the world where they too work for reconciliation, justice, and peace. Disparate churches and organizations now belong to Coventry Association. It also includes members of other religions. It's as much about the Punjabi Sikh and the Punjabi Muslim as about Anglicans and Roman Catholics in England, said Canon David Porter, whose full-time ministry at the cathedral is reconciliation. On the outer wall of the new cathedral, there is a sculpture of the Archangel Michael standing with sword in hand, triumphant over the fallen Satan. Why choose a warlike image for a cathedral dedicated to reconciliation, you might ask? Canon Porter's response? Because just as we wage war, we must wage peace and solidarity with the same kind of energy and resolve.
Thank you, Tom. Before we move on to Taizé, we'll take a few moments for questions, if there are any. And one question I'd like to place up here is you may use the question and answer box on the bottom if you have any questions at this point in our discussion. This question asks, before theology comes getting to know one another, you said, Tom, what does this mean for us in our parishes?
Well, I think first of all, it would simply mean people having forums in which to meet and talk about issues that matter to them, issues around which there may be division. We can't get to know one another unless there's opportunities for us to meet one another. Oftentimes in our churches there is a pattern of people simply coming in just before the service begins and leaving just as the service ends. So I think one of the questions for us is to get to know one another, first of all, in our parishes, but also how about the congregation down the street that also bears the name Christian, but which we may never have had any encounters with or any opportunity for joint action in our neighborhood or suburb or inner city area. Reconciliation work, like all politics, I think, is largely local and is going to move through who you know and who trusts you.
Well, thank you, Tom. I think I'd like to, at this point, ask the people that are with us a question, and that is, what areas of where is reconciliation needed in the areas where you live? And you can use the chat to give us a brief answer if you like. You see that at the bottom of your screen. Where is reconciliation needed in the areas where you live? Or is it not? Tell us if it's not needed.
It might also simply be within your family. Could be within your own church community.
While you're thinking about that, let me go to a question that has been asked by one of our participants. Jim wants to know, Jim answered in the question box. So Jim is telling us that between the Christian and Muslim faith, there's two boxes there. One is a question and answer box, and one says text chat. And if you put your answer in text chat, everybody will see it. Such as Helen Herman, who says the Catholic churches in her area need reconciliation. And you can see Timothy Siegel between parish and the diocese. Between Christian communities in the town, too. From Tim in Illinois. So this gives us a good picture of reconciliation needs in our area, and perhaps we'll be inspired to think of more as Tom continues his presentation and takes us to Taizé.
Yes, the instances you've cited there of where reconciliation is needed certainly are very real, and I can relate to everything that I'm seeing now. Let's go now for a brief visit to a place you may have heard of, Taizé, a small village with no more than 15 buildings in it in the Burgundian countryside of eastern France. But on the hilltop above that village is a monastery, a church, and a tent city. Some background on Taizé's founder, Roger Schutz. Son of a Swiss Calvinist pastor and a French Protestant mother, Roger Schutz was the youngest child in the family with 7 sisters. He was raised with a vigorous Protestantism. His parents allowed him nonetheless at 13 to stay with the Catholic Madame Bioli while pursuing his studies in a nearby town. The conversations awakened in him an ecumenical vocation at a young age. His father eventually directed him towards studies in theology at the University of Lausanne, where he was elected as president of the Student Christian Association. In the Reformation era, both Luther and Calvin basically did away with monasticism as an expression of Christian life, but Roger was clearly looking at things with a fresh eye. He wrote his thesis on the ideal of the monastic life according to St. Benedict and its conformity to the gospel. In 1940, at the outbreak of the Second World War, he left Switzerland for the region of Burgundy in France. There he settled and began welcoming political refugees, mostly Jews, whom the war had compelled into exile. In 1944, a few young men joined him, attracted by his first booklet on community life. The first 7 brothers committed themselves on Easter Day in 1949 to celibacy, and community lived in great simplicity. One of the first things they did was serve the German prisoners of war. In the silence of a long retreat in 1952 and 1953, Brother Roger wrote The Rule of Taizé, the rule of life. Monasticism was slowly re-entering the bloodstream of European Reformed Church Protestantism. All of those first members were Protestant. Catholics began to present themselves as well. And so what has come to be called a parable of reconciliation, or a parable of community, began to take shape. To the diversity of the various Christian denominations was added the diversity of nations. Today, of the 100 or so brothers who form the community, approximately 30 countries and all continents are represented. When I was young, Brother Rogers said in an interview on the community's development, I was astonished to see Christians talking about a God of love while at the same time wasting so much energy in justifying oppositions between themselves. And I said to myself, to communicate Christ, is there anything more transparent than a life that is given? A life where day after day reconciliation is accomplished concretely. Since then, this intuition has never left me, he writes. A life in community could be a sign that God is love. It is fundamental for Christians to enter on the way opened by Christ when he says, go first and be reconciled. Go first, not put it off till later. Already by the end of the 1950s, young people were finding their way to Taizé in increasing numbers. From 1962 on, brothers and young people sent by Taizé began to come and go quietly and with discretion in the countries of Eastern Europe, still behind the Iron Curtain of communism. In 1970, at Easter, with 2,500 young adults present, Brother Roger called for a Council of Youth. It was launched 4 years later with 50,000 participants. Since then, Taizé has also played a key role in terms of grassroots organization for the World Youth Days and its international meetings held between Christmas and New Year's in different European countries. And they're now beginning, in the Advent month, to hold an annual meeting in Latin America or Africa or Asia, which draw up to 100,000 from around the world. With the fall of the Iron Curtain in the second half of the 1980s, Eastern Europeans began coming in busloads. Pilgrims from Asia, Africa, and Latin America were finding their way as well to this hilltop in the Burgundian countryside. One of Brother Rogers' books is entitled The Dynamism of the Provisional. Nothing serves as a better metaphor for it than the way the church itself on the grounds of Taizé has evolved over the years. When I first started going there was just a concrete block church with big top tents off the back of the concrete nave, giving way to temporary siding walls. Over the years, these in turn have given way to split log exterior walls and a roof topped with onion domes associated with Slavic church architecture. The Church of the Reconciliation, it's called, half constructed in Western church style and half in Eastern. It now offers a striking visual metaphor of the two lungs, Western and Eastern, with which the universal church must learn to breathe for a fully vitalized existence. Youth, whether from east, west, north, or south, are by no means the only ones who fill this church 3 times daily to pray the office with the brothers. Previous generations of young adults now return with their spouses and children. And every day, Every day there is a Bible study offered in the morning and a workshop in the afternoon. Generally, those who come to Taizé are invited to stay for a week, culminating in the visually rich and powerful celebrations of the weekend, where every Friday is Good Friday with prayer around the cross. And every Saturday is Holy Saturday with a vigil service by candlelight and chanting. And every Sunday is Easter Sunday with the celebration of the Eucharist. Taizé has evolved a way of uniting people in heart, mind, and voice that qualifies it, I think, as a school of prayer. Reflect for a moment. When you hear Taizé mentioned in some context, to what does it usually refer? In my experience, it's usually an adjective attached to the word prayer. Prayer around the cross on Friday nights in churches and in living rooms. Prayer at an ecumenical gathering. A chant sung by your choir on Sunday. But it's not just any type of prayer. The simple refrains, tirelessly repeated, open up inner space. Space for ruminating the meaning of the words, and then letting go of the words and sinking beneath them to a quieter, more contemplative place in the heart, where, in the silence between the chants, one simply rests in God. It's a form of meditative prayer in community that takes people to a very deep place inside themselves and gives them a taste of inner stillness. And in that silence, they come to rest in God. Resting in God was St. Gregory the Great's way of describing contemplative prayer. Over the years, I've come to the conclusion that prayer in the style of Taizé has introduced hundreds of thousands of people to contemplative prayer. My theory is that one of the main reasons Taizé continues to draw people the way it does is that it has never lost sight of what people yearn for most, an experience of God. On the Taizé property, there's a quiet sanctuary called St. Stephen's Spring, where anyone can go to just be with one's thoughts and feelings, a refuge from the barrage of information and noise that is our normal environment. There's a spring, a couple of ponds, trees and grass, small chapel, and silence. One can only be amazed. Here on a hilltop, in the countryside, outside a village so small it is not even on most maps of France, is this community that is not trying to corral anyone. It's not a church, and it even resists becoming a movement. Its message to all those from different races, cultures, languages, and denominations is simply, come and see. Christ destroys every separating wall. Visitors sleep in tents or barracks. Everyone is asked to give a helping hand, meal preparation or cleanup. Everyone is integrated into reflection groups. That daily concretization of reconciliation and lived experience is what makes Taizé a parable of community. The medium is the message. Everyone is welcome. Everyone makes a contribution. And it would be a mistake to think that the reconciliation of Christians is the goal. The ultimate goal concerns the entire human family, not just Christians. The intermediate goal for us Christians is to live as people who are reconciled in order to be a leaven of peace where humanity suffers and where people are in conflict. Thus do a few of the Taizé brothers live among the poor in various countries simply as a sign of God's love. I hope these images and stories about places where people are fully engaged in the work of reconciliation and unity provides you with inspiration to bring a transforming presence back to the little world under your feet and within your reach.
Well, thank you, Tom. I think we would like to find out a little bit about the presentation And before we have some discussion, I would ask people to tell us what images in the presentation struck you or appealed to you. I know I said to use the chat box area, but I see people were a little mixed up between the chat box area and the question and answer. So if you would just put your answer in the question and answer box, I'll disable the chat box and I'll show the answers as they come along. But in the meantime, we did have a few people that asked, that were talking about where reconciliation is needed. I know that Eva Messina pointed out that reconciliation is needed among immigrants where she lives. And another place is among indigenous Hawaiians and their struggle for recognition by the U.S. government. Then there was Nita Tompkins, who pointed out that various racial groups, both in the schools and in the city, need some reconciliation, as well as social and economic groups. Then somebody suggested, Stephen Steele suggested, that we need reconciliation even within our own church because of the divisions that exist between different camps, liberal and conservative and left and right and so on. And that may well be true. Staying within the Catholic Church, there was a question from Barbara Holstein, who said that their city was divided between the French and the Irish, two different churches. And she asks, how do we start? So even though I know your presentation focused mostly on people of diverse religious traditions, where would you start when we see something like some kind of reconciliation is needed? What would you say is the starting point?
I think coming to appreciate the gifts that each one brings. We can use perhaps as an example just the whole interfaith encounter as a point of reference. One of the things that we discover when we get to know people better in another tradition or of another ethnic background is the richness that they bring to us from their own cultural background or religious background. And just, again, starting with relationship is fundamental, and it's when we get to know the other better that we develop a positive appreciation for some of the riches and the gifts that the other brings, and we end up seeing that, wow, this relationship could really be one for our mutual enrichment.
Thank you.
The French and the Irish both bring exceedingly rich cultures and religious backgrounds, and I think one of the places we can start is simply by affirming the gifts the other brings, which then opens the heart of the other to be open to the gifts that we bring. And then we're in a rich situation of reciprocal sharing.
Some people have responded to the question about what images in your presentation struck them or appealed to them. I see Sherry Granello said that was the image of St. Stephen's that struck her. And Helen Herman was very struck and interested in the notion of quiet sanctuary. Cindy Shea is telling us that she would like to use the Taizé prayer experience in her parish, and she wants to know if there are any resources that she could get a hold of for that.
Yes, there are indeed, Cindy. There are music books as well as videos. Just to show you what the possibilities are here, there was when I lived in Montreal and was director of an ecumenical center for spirituality there called Unitas, we had a Taizé prayer service every Friday night, just in a room of the household. And one of our retreatants on a particular week was a woman from Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And she liked what she saw, and she said, I want to take this back home. And she did take it back home and planted the seed and got the churches interested, and it just grew. And she called me this week just to let me know that they were celebrating the 20th anniversary now of monthly service of prayer in the style of Taizé in Victoria, Vancouver Island, where it rotates to a different denominational church each month, and where there has grown up to be a wonderful musical support, and it's become a time of very rich prayer for members of all the churches of Victoria in British Columbia. And this woman started from nothing. She just went back with the experience that she'd had in a house in Montreal and grew it. If you Google Teze, you will find their own website, but their tapes and books and videos are also distributed by American distributors here.
Thank you, Tom. A few other people have noted that they were struck by particular things, and that includes Timothy Siegel, who was struck by the cathedral in England. And John Kalinowski says that he loved the photo of the figures reaching across the divide in Derry that you showed us regarding reconciliation. Margaret McGrath points out that they need reconciliation among different cultures within churches, African Americans, Hispanic, and so on. And then Jane Norella said that she was inspired by the Coventry Cathedral story that impressed her, and that the prayer was quite excellent. She'd like to have copies to spread among her friends. It's on the handout that we gave you, so that's something you might want to enlarge that single picture, and you'll have the prayer with you there. Or you can also get it at the website for the Coventry Cathedral. Richard Hampson says that he would love to see the Taizé influences, how it would influence Northern Ireland's efforts at reconciliation. Are you? I had somebody who had a question here. They said that in thinking about reconciliation and they experienced in their city, they were afraid about losing their identity. And they wanted to know how they can go about reconciliation without losing their identity as Catholics. And that has to do with working with people who are in various economic groups, as well as in working with with people of other Christian denominations.
Well, I think first of all, it's a wonderful witness to simply do the work for justice and for peace hand in hand with members of other Christian denominations. In so doing, we're giving a very clear sign of what the church is intended to be in the midst of the human community, a sign of the kingdom of God, which is a kingdom of justice and peace and right relationships. And at the same time, I think one of the things that it's good for us to recognize, lest we confuse the adjective with the noun, is that in thinking about hand in hand with other Christians, words like Episcopal, Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, Roman Catholic are all adjectives, and the noun is Christian. And the noun is called a substantive in the sentence because that's where the most substance is. We really want to claim ourselves as disciples of Jesus, how all that binds us is much stronger and deeper than anything that still divides us. And yes, we are proud of the particular tradition that we come from, but I think we want to be careful to remember that our traditions are adjectives, and the main word is that we're all disciples of Jesus.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a question from one of our friends here, Catherine Chadwick, asks, as an Episcopalian, says she can relate to the harm caused by division over segments of a church that claim orthodoxy and make those who don't agree with their vision feel disenfranchised. Do you have any comments about that?
Clearly, we need within our various churches, Catherine, a spirit of genuine dialogue, which means that I don't simply presume that I have all the answers and am just waiting for you to shut up so that I can bring you the truth, but to truly try to hear what the other is saying. I know that in some of the dialogues taking place within the Episcopal Church currently around ethics and morals in human sexuality, meaning of marriage, I have been really struck in reading the documents coming from the Episcopal Church, for example, in the Lutheran Church, to see the approaches that they're taking. They're very reflective approaches, and they're trying to anchor it in their reflections on the Scriptures, and it's just a good example of how we presume we know where the other's coming from until we really start to open ourselves and listen. So I think we're going to have to continue to really listen to one another, because there are some new issues that can represent new obstacles in the unity we seek together as Christians. And the only way forward for us is going to be to try to deepen the questions and to really seek the truth together.
Thank you, Tom. And one final observation that you might want to comment on comes from Timothy Siegel, who says that it seems as though ecumenism as an important element of Vatican II has become less of a priority in recent years. Do you find that to be the case? What would you say about that observation?
Yes, I think there is some truth to that, Timothy. A lot of energy has been siphoned off in the direction of interfaith relations. Many people find that more exotic, more fascinating, and it's also easier in the sense that the bar is not raised as high. With members of other religions, for example, we're looking for understanding, respect, collaboration, and mutual enrichment. With members of other Christian churches, we're looking for unity in faith, a common understanding of the sacraments, common understanding of ministry, shared mission and fellowship, common worship. And that's a more ambitious agenda. In the meantime, in some of the mainline Protestant churches, the church population has been decreasing, which means there's been less resources available to fund offices at national or regional levels that really keep the lamp burning and keep people from falling asleep on their feet. In many places, there once were city councils of churches, state councils of churches that have now morphed, for example, into interfaith council of religion. I think that's not necessarily a good way to go. I think a better way to go is to have an interfaith council and an interchurch council, because we Christians continue to have work that we need to do together. And it's not appropriate for us to bring that kind of work into the forum where members of other religions are present, because we have issues with one another that are not their issues. So where you are, I hope the flame is burning, and if not, I hope you'll stoke the coals.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. That's about all the time we have for observations and questions, but I certainly want to thank you for your presentation today. You've taken some situations that are worldwide known for the violence and the strife, and shown us how reconciliation is a possibility. So I know for myself it's an inspiration, because I don't think on a personal level I face things that are so adverse, although there are certainly situations in our country and in our culture that need the kind of reconciliation you are speaking about. And I also want to thank all of our participants for attending today and for your participation in this presentation today. We appreciate your commitment to becoming a wellspring of healing for others and for yourselves in our world. And we hope and we will pray with you that these efforts will continue by God's grace working within us. So once again, thank you, all of you.
Thank you, everyone.